In this chapter, we will start our discussion about the short-run economic fluctuations. We're going to focus on the business cycle and talk about Keynesian economics. This is a branch of macroeconomics named after one of the most famous macroeconomists, John Maynard Keynes. Okay? When we mention Keynesian economics, sometimes people would joke by saying that a Keynesian economist never runs a marathon. Why? Because he or she doesn't care about the long run. Okay? Just narrowly focus on the short run. And there's even a very famous quote from John Maynard Keynes, which says, "In the long run, we're all dead." Okay. So this has left people an impression that long run doesn't matter in Keynesian economics. We just do everything in the short run. Okay. What does the Keynes really mean by that? This is, what I would suggest you guys to think about. Okay, and is that really, as simple as it sounds, or there might be a misconception about what Keynes said? Okay, so I'm gonna post a short article for you guys to check out on our Moodle site, and during our meeting later, we're gonna discuss this. Okay, what exactly does this quote mean? Okay, in the long run, we're all dead. Okay. Now here, to be able to talk about the business cycles, let's get it defined in the first place. Okay. Now you probably would find that when our economy does pretty well, and people use all kinds of words like economic expansion, a boom, economic recovery, or prosperity, right? And when the economy suffers, we say contraction, or we step into a recession, a depression, like a Great Depression, right? Or economic downturn or slump. So there are many words we use to describe the economic situation. But we want to know which one is most clear-cut, okay? Or which one is the least confusing. Now here, let me show you some examples I found online, okay? The first one here, what you see is we put the real output, in other words, real GDP on the vertical axis, and we put ton on the horizontal. So here, the green curve shows the short-run economic fluctuations. Okay, these regionally highest point, or the peaks, okay, what we call it, and regionally the lowest points are trough. Okay, so between the peak and the trough, we find that when the economy, as we said, is decreasing, the output is decreasing. We call on this chart, it's called recession, right? But the trajectory from the trough to a peak is called expansion, right? And so that's the first one. And another one I found online is like this. Again, the peaks and trough are the same, but in between it's different. So in this one, especially from trough to peak, it's called recovery. Okay. Now, why we would believe these are, these terms are kind of confusing? Because, for example, when we mention recession, oftentimes people would believe that the economy is really in trouble, right? But if the economy is just a little bit below its regionally maximum, output or the peaks, the economy is not really in trouble, right? There might be some just normal fluctuations going on. So, should we really call that a recession? Especially as you can see here, when we stay above the long-term trend. Okay, remember in the previous chapters we mentioned this long-term trend of the real GDP is potential GDP, right? Which is sustainable in the long term. Now, if you look at the second one, it's equally confusing. When we go from the bottom of the fluctuation to the top, we call this recovery. Okay, it makes sense if we go from the bottom to this long-term average or long-term trend, right? The economy is recovering. But if we go already above the trend, like here, should we still call it a recovery, right? So, for example, when you get sick, when we say we wish you a good recovery, that means your body will go back to a normal, healthy situation, right? Now, if the economy already go back to the long-term trend, it's already normal, right? So anything above that, it should not be called a recovery, right? Now here, we want to talk about NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research. Okay, and this is an official place where we can find the business cycle data. Okay, how NBER define these business cycles? They use two words: expansion and contraction. Okay, expansion means the economy produces more than it did in the previous period. And contraction means it produces less than what it did in the previous period. Okay? Remember, expansion and contraction. We believe these two words are least confusing. Okay? Now, we also want to know what is the US economy in most. Okay? So if we look back, let's see, in the past 5 decades or 10 decades, you know, were we in recession? I'm sorry, or contraction more than we were in expansion, or vice versa? And how much time the economy actually stay at the peak or the bottom of the fluctuations? Okay, now. If you go to the NBER website, you can actually find this information. So I'm gonna leave this for you guys to figure it out, okay, before our meeting. So we're gonna discuss this during the meeting. I will show you where exactly you will be able to find that information if you cannot find it on your own, okay? And here, the second thing we're going to look at is the relationship between output and unemployment. Okay, because in this chapter, when we talk about the fluctuations, it's actually measured by these two variables. Okay, the real GDP, or real output, and the unemployment. The first one, we look at the real GDP per capita, but it's the percentage change from a year ago. In other words, it's the growth rate of real GDP per person. Okay, and we look at from 1980 all the way to the most recent quarter. Okay, because the GDP is a quarterly data. And if you go to Fred, you can actually find the data all the way back to 1947, I believe. Okay. And as always, these shaded areas, the gray ones, are recessions. Okay. And the bottom chart here shows the unemployment rate. Okay. Again, for the exactly same period, 1980 to most recent month. Okay, because unemployment rate is monthly data, and you still find the recession, the shaded areas are lined up. Okay. Now here, I want to drive your attention to the comparison between these two. Okay. Could you find any correlation between these two, the output and the unemployment rate? Okay. We actually find a negative correlation between these two. In other words, for example, when the economy steps into a recession, okay, the gray period, and we find that its output fell and the unemployment rose, okay, and the same thing happens during each recession, okay. If we look at in 2020, again, our output sharply declined earlier this year, and the unemployment rate shot up dramatically. Okay, and so here, because of this interesting negative correlation, and we're going to actually have a mathematical way to show this relationship. It's called Okens Law. Okay, Okens Law is named after American economist Arthur Okun, who chaired the Council of Economic Advisors for President Lyndon Johnson back in 1968 and 1969. Okay, and this mathematical relationship between the output and unemployment rates was made first by Okun. Okay, now here is the mathematical expression of the Okens law. Okay, we said that percentage change in real GDP, so that's the growth rate of real GDP, equals 3% minus 2 times change in unemployment rate. Okay, now here, several things we want to explain. The first one is you find a minus sign here in front of the unemployment rate, right? That's because of the negative correlation, right? So what we're saying is when unemployment rate rises, the GDP, real GDP, would fall. Okay, vice versa, when unemployment rate declines, real GDP would rise. Okay, now if we look at these two numbers, we will have a quantitative sense of the relationship. So here 2 means for every 1 percentage point decline in unemployment rate, the potential real GDP would grow about 2%. Okay, would rise about 2%. And vice versa, when the unemployment rate goes up by 1%, then the real GDP would decrease by 2%. Okay, and another number here on the right-hand side is 3%. If you remember what we discussed before, this is a long-term U.S. economy's average growth rate. Okay, 3%. Now let's check out the empirical evidence about the Okens law. Here, each diamond, okay, or each dot on this figure shows 1 year's combination between the growth of real GDP and the change in unemployment rate, okay, as a percentage. So when we run the regression, we would find that there's a very strong negative correlation, okay, between these two variables. Actually, the correlation between them is minus 0.81. Again, a very strong negative correlation between these two. Okay, so the evidence is inconsistent. The evidence is consistent with the Okens law. All right, which should not be a surprise because again, the law itself is actually an empirical observation. Okay. Now, so on this video, we introduced this chapter, okay, and about the Keynesian economics, and we define business cycle. We talk about Okens law, or the relationship between output and unemployment.